to the future of the campuses that we all have to build. We built IT from the old days of, I'm doing manual, I need technology, I need someone to manage that technology, and I need to put some software from either a mainframe, and we just went through that evolution. So I want to first put that out there. No one wants to, throw away the IT shop, that's all. But I wanted to bring two ambassadors here because I really believe, part of why ThinkSpace is really important is that everyone's voice matters, including the partners that actually serve you in what they do. We don't do propaganda. I think that's why we get 600 people in our sessions, but they have strategy in everything they do. So I run a consulting practice. I will never sell my consulting practice. My clients will sell my consulting. I won't sell my consulting. But you will see how we evolve in the strategies and what we do on a day-to-day basis. And I believe that's where Carrie Branyard from Lucien and Lynn Early from Collaborative Solutions. I'm gonna give them a second just for you guys to recognize who they are. But I want JTH, who has been a colleague of mine, I wanted to introduce himself really quick, and then I'm going to go to the ambassador.
Okay. I'm JTH, John Thompson Haas. I've been working with Matt ever since we got started. We talked about this ourselves between us as we're seeing IT change and the cloud moving and the demands of student systems changing. How does that also impact your shops? You're no longer sitting in the bottom of the science building with a bunch of servers. Everything's moving to the cloud, so how does that change? And how does that make your life different? And also, you're going more student-centric. How do you play into that? So that's a lot of where this discussion came from, and I'll hand the mic back.
Great. Hi, I'm Carrie Branyard. I am with Lucien. Lucien is a provider of SIS and ERP to higher education. We have Banner and Colleague. We have about 500 of our 2,700 customers in the cloud already, and more coming every day. I came from higher education. I've known Matt for a good long time.
She was the president of HUG.
I'm a past president of HUG.
President. And she ran a PeopleSoft project, massive one.
Of them, yeah.
There are two of them.
Yep. And I was talking to my husband at lunch, and he reminded me that he's in the HUG Hall of Fame, which I had totally forgotten. And that is not a way to influence, when friends influence people. At any rate, I'm looking forward to this conversation because I think the IT shop is changing. I wrote an article a couple years ago now about the strategic CIO and organization, and I'm really interested in how this conversation is going to unfold. Lynn?
Hi everyone, I'm Lynn Hurley. I'm with Collaborative Solutions. We are a Workday partner. We also have a strategic transformation practice, and we help our customers think about how they want to move not just IT, but all their functions into the cloud. And so one of the things I'm really looking forward to in this conversation is how you all think about your IT shops and what you're thinking about the future will be and how they become a strategic partner to the business in your institution. So let's get started.
Yeah, and think about this. I have Workday and Lucien on the stage together, not pouring, like, in the end, the goal is to be successful. And me and Carrie know this. I've said this to Carrie many times, even when I was running our student group. And I said, Carrie, my goal is to make the change and the transformation on campuses as much as possible. So one, I want to say thank you for them for being able to step up here and have this conversation. There's a couple of things. One, if you get onto our platform, you can communicate, and this is how your voice matters, comes into play. We use crowdsourcing concepts to get the ideas out. In the old days, the loudest voice won. In our ThinkSpace days, it is a collaborative discussion that bubbles up conversation, right? The other way is raise your hand. We will allow you to speak. We may call on you if your eyebrows go up or you're shaking your head or shaking. It just means that Matt should call on me, all right? So we wanted this to be as collaborative as possible. We don't want to talk at you. We want to talk with you. And this is what I think is really powerful about what we're doing in this space. And I want to say thank you to the HUG for allowing us to do these kind of spaces. So, all right, so let's go to the first question that we really want to tackle here. What does transformation mean to your campus? Right? Not what you do, what does it mean for you on your campus? The next question is going to be about the activities, so I don't want you to put activities here, because I want us to start defining what the aspirations of a transformation office is. And I think Carrie kind of mentioned it. Things are changing in the market. You have to change with it. So let's start and let's think through this a little bit. Anything?
Yeah, so, and we're seeing a lot already of the fundamental changes of the way that you're doing things. I've worked with clients who said, I'm putting in my procedures that I've had since 1975. And every time I've done something, it's just roll it into the next system, and into the next system, and into the next system, to the point you don't know why you're doing it. You also, you've got that transformation of the student experience, and that you're transforming the student experience. Are you right now focusing on that, and how are you doing that? And also stronger student support. When I started putting in systems, it was all about how do I make it easier for the administration.
So I'm going to ask Carrie this question. I'm going to ask Carrie this question. When we're changing the fundamentals of way of doing things, the reason I say this is she's gone through decades of the transformation. So, but it's true, right?
It is.
So how do we change? How do we think about transformation as we go through those decades? Because I believe the next 5 to 10 years, we will see more transformation. We just did a blockchain show and tell right here. It is fast and it's furious at this moment. What does that mean for these folks to think about the transformation that's here?
Yeah, changing the fundamental way of doing things. I think at this point in time, higher ed is actually reevaluating its mission. It has to think through its funding mechanism. It has to think through who it's serving. It has to think through how the workforce is changing, how the educational process is changing, how the way we are supporting those are changing. The aging workforce, the workforce that's disappearing. I was doing a presentation earlier today with Joe Moreau, and he used the term, we talked about the great resignation. He also says, how about the great empty candidate pool? Like we're not seeing candidates applying for our jobs right now. I think there are no end of ways in which we need to examine the drivers that have to result in changing the fundamental way we do things. And I did a different presentation this morning as well that talked about it being an intentional change. It's going to happen to us whether we do it intentionally or not. Those who are going to survive are the ones who go into it with an intention of understanding what their new strategy is, what their new conditions are going to be, etc.
There's a comment here, become a university for the entire society.
I love that, Matt, and I think that's one of the, we talk about recovery with equity, we're talking about diversity, inclusion, equity, etc., institutional equity, individual equity, access, and ultimately that's all about student success. And it has to be for the entire society. Frankly, we're not going to solve the empty candidate pool until we become a university or a college for the entire society.
And Lynn, I'm going to ask you this question about creating programs to meet the students where they are, because I think there is, right now we are in a major system, we have a degree system, we follow the traditional 4-year path, but I believe that schools have to reimagine the offerings that allow for them to get into market maybe sooner. I would love your thoughts on that.
Sure. So I think we saw this pre-COVID, but I think it accelerated because of COVID, right? So students are demanding on-demand education at any time of the year, not just in semesters, right? And they may want to have a 6-week course or a 3-week course that's totally off the traditional schedule. And so how do we deal with that situation, how do we manage that? And then also, how do we manage students who want to come from any time in their life, right? They are workers already, or perhaps they've already got a graduate degree, but they want to have a certificate in something special that tunes their skill set for the next step in their career. And I think this is happening more and more with this Great Resignation. People are saying, oh, I could do something totally different. But they don't want to go back to school for a 4-year degree for that. They want just this little piece that'll help fill out the gap that they have. And so how do we do that in this setting?
And we always talk about enrollment, right? We look at this 4-year journey and then we're like, we forget about the person who just graduated, right? We forget about them. And then the other thing we see is the degree is being questioned. So why are we not attaching badges to that? Why are we not allowing competencies to be thought of inside of a badge? You still give out I'm a criminal justice major designing student systems, so think about that, right? But why couldn't I have a badge that said, you know what, this guy actually understands, ERP or whatever the case is.
Right.
I'm going to pass this off to William really quick. Go ahead, William.
It was actually something, as you said earlier, it was when we're asking about transformation, I think what we're asking is a little too late. Why are we just now looking at how we're going to transform a situation that we put ourselves in because we allowed people to be stagnant? We allowed people to be okay simply pushing paper around. We allowed people to be okay just pushing buttons and never pushing our staff. And I didn't see it up there, Matt, and that was the only reason that I brought it up, is in order to change the fundamental ways we're doing it, the only way to evolve, the only way to increase the student experience is to increase the staff experience. But it also means not letting us be comfortable,
Yeah, I agree with that. We were just talking about this actually beforehand, and how we have folks who've been in the university setting as an employee for 30 years, right? And they have been allowed to just come along, right? That's been fine. And now our students are demanding a different experience. Staff is demanding a different experience. And so how do you help those folks who've been accustomed to just the status quo evolve in their experience as well?
Well, I think when you think about biological evolution, the thing that survives is the thing that anticipated the next set of conditions. Mm-hmm. So if you're really going to talk about how we move forward, how we stay ahead of it, you have to anticipate. You have to be able to see around corners. I think that's a very good point.
I think there's one other piece, and you talked about how can we be content and letting people just sort of push paper. One of the things that caught my eye was commitment. We've got to be committed to that transformation, and you've got to stay committed to that transformation and consistent with that commitment. And I think that's a real key point. You just can't say, oh, I want to transform, and that's a couple of emails and maybe some, other items, but you have to be committed to it consistently.
So I put down commitment, because how do you get commitment from your leadership? Like how can we learn as staff that we have the commitment from our leadership that they want to transform as much as we do, or that we're seeing the students on a day-to-day basis?
And that, to me, is coming back to the school's vision. What's the mission and the vision of the institution, right? And calling leadership back to that. And if that vision doesn't address the need, should we be talking about shifting our vision and our mission to fit the changing times?
And I think the mission of the 90s and the early 2000s is different than today's mission,
yes,
right? And we lived in a very gatekeeper ecosystem. When I went to college, it was like, come on in, no, stop. Come on in, no, stop. Like, that's how universities are built, on this. Come on in, but stop until you do this. Come on in, stop, I want to do this. We live in and students are confused, and they're bothered by the stop, and, oh, you got to do this, to do that, right? So
the one last thing I would say is, I know your institution, I implemented PeopleSoft at your institution. So, and when we did it originally, it was because we lost access to an entire generation of student donors. They were so pissed at the abysmal student services we gave before PeopleSoft that no one was going to donate. And that's what got their attention. And now 23 years later, 24 years later, there is a new generation of students with a new generation of expectation. The thing I talked about this morning in one of my sessions around getting commitment was ask your leadership how many students are leaving your institution on an annual basis. So you're graduating 10,000-ish, and there's another 5,000-ish that just disappear for whatever reason. That's 15,000 students a year that you're actually losing a contact with. So delaying, every year you delay is 15,000 touch points that you are not able to change their life, their experience, their meet their expectation, etc. And I think that's one of the things I found effective in some of our other institutions to generate a little bit of urgency. When you say 5 years, that's 75,000 people. Do you really want to not have 75,000 touch points that, like, they're your future taxpayers, they're your future voters, they're your future citizens, they're your future workforce. Like, let's build. I feel very acutely the declining public perception of higher education. We can change that if we're meeting their needs earlier. So that's one of the thoughts that I have.
So this is, our ThinkSpace always happens. We can dive into a lot of this for like an hour, right? So there's a lot here. It becomes student-centric, fewer complications, becoming that university, breaking the traditional model. Like, these are some really good pieces. Creating new programming, improve institutional efficiency. I think all of this is, hey, how do we become more open-minded, become more innovative? How do we bring all that commitment in? So, and then transform the student experience. So, let's move to the next question, which is really, what are you doing with that now? Now you said this is what it means to you. What are those activities that you're doing now, or you're positioned to do in the next year or 2 years, right? What are those things that you see? Because we're trying to get an understanding of who leads this.
Engaging all voices in the process. I mean, I always say that I can configure a
They
system.
should use ThinkSpace.
Well, I mean, seriously. That's what I was going to say, is they should use ThinkSpace. This is a great technology way to allow people to contribute their voice, crowdsourcing the ideas.
And that's one of the things that I'm seeing more and more from when I started out, where it was you sat with the IT people and they gave you this big long list of here's what it needs to look like, and you put it in and you went away and everybody else cried in pain. And now it's bringing everybody into it, and what you're trying to do is to make sure that you're matching what it is you're trying to do as an institution.
So, so this goes back, I'm going to wear my student system hat on. The floor burns that I got were because we never looked at it as what is the outcome. So whenever we come into a campus, and there's many firms that will do this, they will come and say, what's your as-is project? What is your as-is process? As soon as you say that, you are now ready to script out a roadmap to the current path that you are on. As soon as you say, what am I going to assess currently? I'm already drawing the drawing to the same destination and the same path, instead of, and I'd love for them to do it, because for them, they don't want you to do an as-is. Because their softwares and their development and their processes are looking at the future of thinking, how do we do this better? I used to run a firm that would have blockers, and my first question is, stop looking at the blockers. They bought the damn product. Use the product as designed, right? I'd love your take on it, because if we look at outcome-based, like what is the outcome of your campus? And then work backwards and say, how does the software? And the reality of it is, there isn't one software, I'm just going to put this out there, there isn't one software that will do everything. They may all say that. There isn't one.
Or there can't be.
And there can't be. And you don't, and I think in our state of student, someone said that. We expect too much from our ERP and SIS to do everything, when we should wrap things around it that have engagement layers. That let's let the SIS do what it's supposed to do, which is really boring transactional stuff. But the engagement layers and other things the AIs and the data warehouse, like, let's wrap around it. I would love your take on it. I would love it from an implementer's. What would change if folks looked at outcomes instead of as is?
I love that, Matt, because when I think about how back in the day and even now, when you start with as is, all you're going to do is implement the new thing in the image of the old.
Yeah.
And you are not going to get a different outcome. And so starting with the business outcomes, there's a whole, at Ellucian we have a capability model that starts with business objectives and it goes into capabilities that are required to meet those objectives, and then what's the actual functionality, and then how do you implement it, best practice. Like, that's the stack. And you have to start with what the business outcome is that you desire. And it might be increasing enrollment, it might be student retention, it might be, improving the way in which you are dispersing financial aid. I don't care. Pick any of those things. They all lead back to an outcome and an objective. And by the way, buying a new system is not an objective. Moving to the cloud is not an objective. Why are you doing those things? And that's when some of the answers on here are aiming at the why. Yeah. But you have to start with the why and the objective, and then you can move into how to effectively utilize the tool you buy.
Yeah.
Just real quick, I'll add on to that. Once you get past that bit, then what we would like you to do is say, if I could do this any way I wanted to do it. Let's just forget about the software for a moment, what its capabilities are. If I could do it any way I wanted to do it, like blue sky, how would I do it?
I call it what ifs.
What ifs, yes. What's my blue sky? And then you can build your tool, whichever one it is, doesn't matter, with that in mind, right? So you have your outcomes, and then you say the people who are doing the work every day, this is what I hate about what I do, this is what's been in my way, right? Or this is what makes what I do inefficient. If I could do it any way I want, how would I do it? And I think that's a wonderful way to start the conversation for design.
And I think it's one key element that underscores every single thing that everybody has just said. You've talked about blue sky thinking, talked about what my goals are, talked about what ifs, and talked about the as is. All of that comes from, you've got to give people permission to fail. You've got to let them make a decision, and if it's right, and it works, and if it doesn't, they can't be put out on the street for it, because otherwise they won't set those goals. They won't look at where they're going to go. They aren't going to think about it. They're going to do exactly that and have a fit gap session that does an as-is process, because they do not want to risk putting in a to-be process. You have to give them permission to fail.
JDH, I love that, and it's then having a cycle that's fast enough that is not deadly. Right, that you don't lose another 15,000 students because it took forever to get to a fail point. So a cycle that is rapid and is and allows that learning experience so you can improve as you iterate, I think is crucial.
So number 16 says inclusivity, data, research, educational experience, and engaging the community. So that is a lot. That person should have done like 5 of these posts, but all are valid questions. So if I think about inclusivity, do we live in a university that's very inclusive? We're very exclusive. Everything we do is, can you do this to get to do this? We're not a very inclusive ecosystem. I mean, my team, the Miami-Dade folks, I asked this question. You're not really inclusive, because you're looking at all the gatekeeping kind of concept. And the reason I say this is, in the 90s, before we got in, we just copied manual processes to what we do today, because humans needed to gate check everything. Think about Amazon. Things are being gate checked in the back end and we don't even know it. It's automated, right? So part of this is, let's remove all these policies and procedures away from it so that we start looking at how do we become inclusive? Like, let's remove all the, what I call structured activities that have rules and sequence, and let's make technology do that. And let's take the what I call unstructured activities, where it requires critical thinking and reasoning and body language. That's when we become a powerful network of folks. And you know who does that? IT does that. IT has to go in and think about the structured work all around campuses and then start to say, I can automate this. I can leverage the system better. I can do it better. Because right now, IT just keeps the lights on, just to cover themselves. Go ahead.
So we talked in one of my sessions this morning about the best interface is no interface.
Yeah.
Right? So if it can be automated, it should be automated. And I'm sure some of us in this area have been around long enough to remember when we used to say students having to choose their classes is pedagogically sound, and it's good for them to have to learn how to navigate the degree program, which is ludicrous, right? I mean, we now understand that to get students through, give them the guideposts, give them template plans, and let them register from their plans, et cetera, et cetera. Like, that kind of thinking, we have to replace the notion that a student needs to know the rules about how a university works has to go away. We have to remove that friction. And that's where ultimate digital transformation happens. And that is, I agree with you, and I'm sure we're going to get to this question here in a little bit around what is the role of IT in making that happen? Because students, especially first-gen students who don't have good support at home, they don't know the rules. We barely know the rules. How do you expect a student to navigate the rules of the institution and then succeed? That is a false set of expectations.
Lynn, do you have any thoughts
No,
on
I'm
that?
good.
Okay. Drop the mic moment.
That's right, it really was, that was good.
No, and like I said, I think part of what we're trying to get folks to recognize is IT's role is going to be different. Right? I mean, do you guys all agree with that? A little bit? Like, IT's role is to support the stakeholders on the business aspirations, but they should start not just thinking about the plumbing. And I'm going to go to the next question because it's going to walk right into the plumbing piece. Okay? So I'm going to give you, all this is thought out. Me, Carrie, Lynn, and John, we all walk through this. So we kind of know the answers in our head.
We want to hear your answer.
But we want to know your answers, right?
Yep.
So what are the plumbing aspects? So we talked about plumbers. Like, we say, hey, a lot of times what IT is doing is plumbing, right? They're just making sure that things are working, or they're keeping the lights on, right? So what are the things that if you go to your IT shop that you know that is plumbing? It has to happen. If it doesn't happen, I'm surprised we don't. I'm looking for the one that I'm going to see up here in a second. Yeah, keep going. Keep going. And as soon as I see it, yeah, this is very tactical. What are we afraid about? In IT, what is the most scariest moment in an IT shop? Network down. What else? Breach.
That
Cyber.
was the number one thing. That
Oh, what's number one?
Yeah,
Keeping data secure.
Keeping data secure.
Oh, yeah. I was looking for the word cyber.
Yeah.
Because put it this way, all your IT shops will say, "Oh, cyber. We're trying to transform something. Oh, we gotta make sure." So part of this kind of conversation is, hey, let's make sure that the lights are on, that we're safe. None of us are saying you shouldn't do that. None of us are saying that. It needs to be said. But this is the work this is why we don't have a transformational IT shop. Because this is us focused on keeping the lights on. Right? So my question is, go ahead and use your 10 yellow stickies. And I want you to say, is that going to enable the transformations that we just spoke about? Any thoughts from you two? William, did you have something to say? You wanted to say something?
They were talking earlier about the transformation, right? And I forget your name from Elysium.
I'm Carrie.
Carrie, thank you. You said something, and I actually had a question that I wanted your guys' opinion on. So, we're state workers, right? And there's an actual joke that you work 50% of the time, 60% of the time, and you get none of your work done. So, if we're talking about transformation, and specifically even in IT, where all we're doing is troubleshooting somebody else's problem that most of the time they created for themselves, right? Someone else took down prod because of a query, or someone else took down prod because they did a bad SQL delete statement. Like, okay, so how it may have been me, I'm not gonna say that.
No shame here.
No, not ever. Hey, if you don't take down prod once in your life, you're not doing it right. So how from all of your experience, right, in order to transform the state employee, right, what do we need to do? Because you work with them, you implement, they're working with your systems, you're integrating with them. So when you walk in and you're like, they say 2 years, but it's really looking like 4 because nobody's emailing me back. Like, what do we need to do to not be that 50%?
Yeah. So we talked about this in the 2 sessions I did this morning in the leading change track. Almost every customer that I work with has a collective bargaining situation or public, state worker, and it has to start with culture change. And EDUCAUSE was pretty clear about that in their research that they did over the last couple of years. To them, digital transformation is technology, workforce, and culture. When you read the literature, digital transformation is people, process, technology, and sometimes data. And I love the fact that EDUCAUSE called out culture because that's very higher ed specific, right? And I think the element, for me at least, is everyone who's in higher ed is there for the student or for the mission, or there's a connection. It used to be that they were there because it was a secure, stable job. And we used to say, when I was at an institution here in the front of the front row, we used to actually talk about we paid less than market rate because we were stable and you had a pension and you had better vacation and so on and so forth. That's not true anymore. You can't keep staff that way. People are there for the mission or they're moving on. And so for me, if you're tapping into the mission, you are then building that sense of urgency, that sense of connection and motivation, and that's your objective and that's your why, and then you can hang the rest of your digital transformation off of that. If you skip that step, it's hard to actually get people to buy into, let's move to a SaaS solution, because that's when they start thinking about, you're just after my job. You're just trying to outsource union jobs to a different, and that's not true either.
Right.
We need to retool, and I'm sure we get to that here in a little bit. But that's my response.
I think we got a comment here.
Yeah. When we talk about the transformations, right, we are talking about, to my mind, it comes it goes in 2 different paths. One is the business transformation, and the second one is the IT alignment. And are we are we going in parallel? Are we ever going to merge? Is the question that I keep on asking myself, right? IT transformation, where you're trying to keep your lights on. Do we have time to look into that bigger picture of where we want to take it to the next level, or plan for that next level? Or are we looking back to the business to know where we want to go? That's what you are talking about, right? We want to talk about our goals, and those are the kind of directions that we want from the business. I'm in the IT. You might have figured out. So, it's a very
Yeah.
Want to go first?
I do, because I also implemented that institution. So when we did it, we had the best steering committee I have ever worked with in my life. Was at the system you represent, because all 4 CFOs were on the steering committee, all of the registrars were on the steering committee, all of the CIOs were on the steering committee in the central office. And it was so tight. There was no light between anyone. We knew what the goals were. We knew what we wanted to achieve. We knew why we were doing it. We knew how much it should cost. We knew how long it should take. The end. And it was a really rewarding experience. And then what happens is everybody's tired and there's other stuff to focus on, and we lose some of that cohesiveness. So I think there's, you come back to Cotter and leading change and building a sense of urgency. That's some of what we have to continue to do. There is, I think about it as the moral obligation to our students and to the creation of knowledge and society and all of that. And if you can really tap into that, you can keep some of the energy. I think when we get to the point of talking about what the opposite of plumbing is, we can talk more about the strategy for how to do that.
I'll navigate that because she's good because she knows exactly where I'm going.
I just wanted to, I'll add briefly because I want to let Matt do some navigation here. One of the things that I liked about this question is often when we talk about transformation in IT, people immediately think, I'm going to go buy a whole new tool. I'm going to get something that's really shiny and new and put it in. But if you look at
sorry, John.
that's all right. There were a number of items here in terms of what do I have that I could transform with. There was integrations, there was data, there were other things that you could build. You've got some tools right now that if you leveraged and brought in data from data islands across data bridges so that people could see what's actually happening, and you start integrating into some of your other systems, you can begin that transformation without, blowing up the world and bringing in a whole new technology.
And I think the piece here is there is a large strategy to move from your existing systems. It has to be said. When that's done is a question, but what do you do when you're ready to do that? How do you wrap around it? Lynn, you were going to say something.
Well, just to address what you were saying. To me, it is about collaboration. You were talking about how do you bring them together, right? Will we ever meet in the same place? And that really is a spirit of that collaborative piece where the IT folks and the business are sitting together and saying, what do we need and how do we get there together? And how do we support each other? Because I think the business also has to make sure they're delivering the right message to IT with what they need, right? You can't build a bread box around something that you don't know how big the bread is or what kind of bread it is. So that's the piece I wanted to share with you is that the most important, the first step is to get all those stakeholders in the right place together where you can decide on the way forward. So.
And while, if you guys want to just start to answer the question, what does IT architect the future? How does it IT architect the future? What are the things that IT should be thinking about to architect all the transformations that we just talked about? What's their role during this period of time? And one of the comments in chat, so we also use chat here, from Michelle says, revising IT processes to increase efficiency while creating a better customer experience. And I believe that's a customer experience for the staff. I believe IT can't take weeks to do something when the business users have some urgency in front of them, right? So I don't know where Michelle is or if she's virtual. Oh, got it. We got you, Michelle. Got you.
That goes back to culture, though.
Culture.
Yep. Culture doesn't change overnight. And so what I wanted to say was culture doesn't change overnight. And so going back to that is how do you start the process early enough where you're not only changing the culture of your staff, but you're also recognizing what's changing on the daily for your students.
So I'm a big culture person, so I think my clients know that. I always talk about culture. I think, why does, and we always, it's easy to go use Apple because they're really successful, right? But I'm going to use Apple because there's a why there. It's clean, it's efficient, it's good services. I think the why of your campus has to come out. Butler, oh yeah, there she was. Michelle, look at that, just on cue. I was talking about, she talked about the Butler Way. So how do you get the Butler Way so that everyone recognizes this is what Butler does? The Butler Way is the way we run. I think there's a culture there. There's a culture that I think people have to recognize that what I do, even though it may be IT, I might be the registrar, my opportunity here is how do I create the Butler Way? I'm making that up. I saw it. I'm sure each of your campuses have your own aspirations of what a campus is. I also believe some of it is you have to get people to do things that are really meaningful to them. Because right now we just give them a job and a task and we say, this is what you're responsible for. You don't really give them the empowerment to say, you know what? I am a part of the transformation that this campus needs to be, and I feel it and I represent it every day. And I think that's where culture really comes into play. So
And that's a top-down also experience, right? Your leadership needs to be saying, this is the culture we'd like to have, and they need to embody it and then brand it and market it through the community, the campus community, right? I'm sure the Butler Way is quite a top-down. It's, yeah, absolutely.
hold on, Michelle.
It's
Important for you to
Yes.
articulate it. Because there's very schools, not all schools have that one theme. They have it, I think Baylor has it. I'm not saying that's right, but when they have
useful.
it's useful. Because then you're not just admitting a student, you're saying,
You're part of the
Yeah.
Butler family
Right.
and the community, and it's very much that it's the team. It actually started, of course, with our basketball team and Brad Stevens and, the Butler Way. Well, actually, I think our athletic director before that came up with it, but it was team before self, and take care of the weakest link, help each other out. It's all the community, it's for everyone, and yes, and so the Butler Way, it's a well-known principle there. In fact, the main city street leading into Butler is now called Butler Way.
that's great. And so when we think about this, in here is IT, architects of the future. The first one is business goals, right? So IT has to be in the C-suite spot where if the deans are saying this, IT has to be able to say, yeah, but this is the restrictions that we have. I see someone nodding and I always say, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, we've been told for many years that our IT needs to be needs-driven, but it was a passive role. So faculty articulate needs, IT deliver it efficiently. But what I'm hearing this afternoon is different. What I'm hearing is IT needs to be agenda-driven. And that might mean that IT participate and talk back to faculty or with faculty and come to an agreement with faculty, but what the actual objectives of the university is. So it's highly informative. That's why I'm not.
Where are you from?
From Stellenbosch in South Africa.
All right. We got international in the house.
So, Matt,
Go ahead.
I wrote an article about that for EDUCAUSE a couple years ago, that pre-pandemic. So that whole period of time just like is a blip. But exactly that it needs to be agenda driven, and the CIO needs to have a seat at the table because they need to help guide the art of what's possible. There is a different style of visioning that's happening in IT now, in strategic leadership in IT. And I think that the strategic CIO, EDUCAUSE had that was one of their top 10 priorities, was the strategic CIO. How do we help our folks be strategic CIOs? I think that we don't accomplish this, we don't stop being plumbers if the CIOs aren't being agenda driven. They're not here to make the donuts. They're here to actually further the goals of the institution.
And my partner Joey's not here, but I would have asked him to make this comment. But when there's something called adaptive leadership, right? Mm-hmm. And he always talks about that a lot of times people are looking down and they're just making sure what they do today is getting done, right? Magic Johnson doesn't dribble with his head down. He dribbles with his head up. He's still dribbling. He's still doing the plumbing. But he knows where he's going. I think IT has to do the plumbing. You have to automate everything that can be automated so that you can look up. I think that, so my statement is, if you have a CIO who is just a plumber, you don't want them inside of your C-suite. You don't want that, because it will halt everything from that moment, because they're thinking about the plumbing. Go ahead.
Matt, I want to tell a story. So I'll try to keep it brief. This happened to me about 3 years ago. I accidentally sat next to a president at a ASU GSV event. And we got to talking, and I was asking him about his Pathways program, and they were one of the original Achieving the Dream schools. I said, well, you know, we're working on that, and we'd love to come talk to you. Can we help you out? And he said, sure. So he invited me to campus, and he wanted me to meet with his CFO, his provost, and his CIO. So we get to the thing, and we're the vendor. So we got there early, and we were setting up, and we were going to try to control the table, right? So like Mary Poppins style boardroom, big dark paneling, a 30-foot long board table. And so we put our bags at one end, like literally set our briefcases and stuff on the table so that no one would sit there. And then strategically set up so I would be sitting here and the CFO could sit there and the provost and then our other person, so we arranged all of this. And the CFO walked in and sat where we figured the CFO would sit, and the provost walked in and sat where we figured the provost would sit. The CIO walked in and sat next to my purse at the 30 feet away at the other end of the table. And she was not in the game. All she could talk about was the last upgrade and how smart they were for figuring out how to do it, and that they were done, and they don't want to do another one of those for a period of time. And instead, the CFO and the provost were telling us all about their strategy and what they were doing. And then we got about an hour and a half into this conversation. They're like, aren't you here to sell me something? And I said, no, I'm here to understand what you're trying to do. What's your objective? What's your outcome? And they said, well, and they went into some detail. And then they said, what can you do for me? And then we had a more substantive conversation, and now they're using their software more effectively, and they have a better recruitment strategy and a better retention strategy, blah, blah, blah. And that CIO had no influence whatsoever in the actual outcome of the institution. And that to me was heartbreaking. She could have been the strategic leader, and they could have had access to that so much earlier, but she was only focused on plumbing. She wasn't focused on the outcome. So anyway, that's one of my favorite sad stories.
That's a great story. And listening to all of these and looking at this makes me think of a quote that I read a little earlier. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. It's not the turbulence that will kill you. It's trying to navigate through the turbulence with the old ideas. That's what's going to get you.
No, this is great, and I really appreciate all of the context. And Gabrielle keeps me on track. So she said, Matt, we got to get going. So we're going to go to the next question really quick. And really this goes to what both Lynn and Carrie was hinting to, is what are the next, and you notice the way I say this, I say, what is the next generation strategy? I didn't say what's the next strategy. What is the next generation? The reason I say this is the way that an IT shop operates today is just a little bit from the 1990s. So the question is, how do we start to operate with the next generation innovations, the automations? Because I saw in one of them was, hey, we got to automate things. Like, if we're not automating things, we're not next gen right off the bat. The reason Uber and Amazon is fast is because humans aren't doing the work of those rules, right? Or putting process and data through that process. So what are the next generation strategies? And then you'll see that I have these 3 stickies out here. One is on policy has to be revisited to do this. Procedures have to be, because policy and procedures are different. Procedures is something you just never thought about and you just do because it's always done that way. Culture, how many times have we talked about culture revisited? So what's the next generation strategy that they're going cloud, and I want to come back to this in a second because that's a conversation, that'll probably be a ThinkSpace of its own. No admissions application, wow, that's a pretty interesting one. Embedded AI, experience-driven processes, strategy to embody the residential campus and campus years to give radical flexibility. Wow. Go ahead, Lynn.
I was just gonna say, wow, that's a tall order there. Thinking about how we think about all the courses, right, that we'd have to shift, but just thinking about the students moving on and off of campus and international students coming from, and their financial aid and all of those things, the components of that. What we think about oftentimes when we're thinking about strategy to make changes like this are what are the regulatory requirements that might interfere with that, right? Especially around financial aid, right? So yeah, that's a rich one. That one definitely needs a ThinkSpace.
Yeah, when we think about residential campuses, I think we are so used to the traditional residential campus, but we just had the session earlier at 11:30 with the new traditional student. The new traditional student isn't just the 18 to 22-year-old anymore. It's these students who are, because we live in the future of work ecosystem, right? What is the future of work ecosystem? It is where we look at the work of the future, we say, where is that work done? Who does that work? When is that work going to be done? And then you have to teach them how to do that work at the right time. So if there is new technologies, you have to now allow for your campus to teach those technologies, even the mindset of it. So if you think about it, the workforce is very remote and very flexible, yet our campuses are not, right? So that's a really interesting point there. And then breaking down the silos, I'd love for either Carrie or Lynn, because I think that gives you floor burns on most implementations, because we don't break the barriers. The financial aid does it one way, we do it only one way, and so forth. So go ahead.
You know what? We've been talking about breaking down silos since my first PeopleSoft implementation at one of the institutions here in 1998. And we have not achieved it. And I think that it's some of what I believe needs to occur is in our future generation strategies. We have to start with design thinking. We have to start with empathetic design. We have to think about being radically student-centered. Because the moment you become radically student-centered and stop thinking about what the rules are and making students navigate our rules, we start thinking about what that process looks like. And no interface is the best interface. So the moment we decide that it's not about preserving what I always have done, and Matt, your comment earlier about stop with the as-is thing, because the as-is thing is only going to embed the silos in our future. You got to stop that. You've got to start thinking about what that future looks like.
Yeah, and I was in your session earlier when you spoke about engaging everyone. I had actually written engaging all voices. Hiring also tends to be so hierarchical that when we think of breaking down of the silos, I meant also engaging all of the voices, from part-timer to student assistants to senior level administrators. I'm focusing on the why. I think it's critical. That's something that we've done at Miami-Dade College, with Matt's leadership. And the reason why we've been able to do it is because people have been brought to the table that would never usually had been on the table, and we've been able to listen to over 1,300 voices in this process. So that's how you deconstruct when you hone in on the unit of analysis, being the student, and then you humanize the data to make it possible. If not, it's just a bunch of VPs sitting in a room talking about numbers and not validating and humanizing what really matters, which is the student, really. So that's what worked for us.
And really quick, in that case where Jaime is talking about, they have 8 campuses, 8 presidents, 8 cultures, 16 deans, right? And I remember having the conversation with President Pumariga, and she is looking future. She's not dribbling, she is looking up. And I think her concept is, we need everyone to be in on this journey, because that journey will allow for all of them to grow. Because she believes that if they do it, everyone succeeds. And she basically gave me 10, gave me her all-star 10 every Tuesday morning. And I think that first meeting with them, they probably looked at me like, this guy is crazy, we're never gonna get this change. You ask them now, everyone is there. That 1,300 voices were of part-timers. It was of faculty, it was of students. And we did journey mapping.
Right.
And we did journey mapping to allow for them to recognize they don't need Mad Alex. They need themselves to look at the picture and say, we have to change. I can leave them now and they can say, we got to do all these different changes. Don't leave me.
But you could.
But you could. My report to them says anybody can do this. But because the reality of it is, I believe campuses are really powerful by themselves. Beyond is built to get people to recognize your voice matters, the way you operate matters, the way that the Hug has the most strongest ecosystem in the market. You could look at EduCollege, look at all these other places. Hug has the most people doing the most creative work, but we don't necessarily always bring them out on campuses. It's time for us to start looking at those people and saying, they're all-stars. Let's start looking at it. What do they do? What's the why? And we take that forward. I got 5 minutes. I see my warning coming in. So, any thoughts, John?
No, I think both of you have hit this as Matt has as well. You have to break down those things that are holding you back. You've got to be committed to that change, and you've got to understand that if you're following along the old paths, you're going to go in the ditch.
Lynn, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So one thing that I just wanted to share that we used to do an activity, and I think we're doing it with all of our student implementations with Workday, but we brought in representatives from each part of the campus, from the staff, so the registrar's office, financial aid, some faculty, all that. And we were mapping out the 2-year life cycle of the implementation. And the first thing that we did, it was very much a page from design thinking, we took stickies and we put the academic calendar basically on a very long whiteboard. And people went up and put what they did during each phase of the academic calendar. And then we talked about it. And folks were shocked in different parts, just even staff. Oh, you do that? Oh, you depend on me to do that. I didn't know I had to do my thing before you could do your thing. This is a college that's been around forever. And we were startled by the fact that they hadn't communicated that. So even if your staff alone doesn't know that they depend on each other, this is such an important activity to do first.
So that's what you just said is, do that first.
Yes, first.
Right?
Yes.
Because if you do that, you will then start to almost begin the journey of, are we really even operating the right way?
Right.
Because then once you answer that question, then when you bring the technology folks in, you're then saying, this is where we have to go. And it's easier, less floor burns. They will still be some floor burns. Go ahead, Carrie.
The other thing I just wanted to add is, I love, Jaime, the fact that you had 1,300 voices embedded and you were able to access the staff and students and part-timers and faculty from across all 8 of your system. That's digital transformation in how to transform, right? So in the old days, you couldn't have gotten 1,300 voices in Earth time. You would have never been able to complete that, right?
Yeah.
So this is what allows for that to happen
Exactly.
now.
5 years ago, I couldn't do this. I couldn't do this in my student group. We are living in a next generation world. That is what we're doing. Even here, we're streaming right now.
Right.
So think about that. I got 2 minutes on my thing.
Also in that process, I think one thing that was important is talking about changing the culture. In acquiring those 1,300 voices, you got people to start thinking differently. And you could give feedback and you could add anonymous feedback without getting in trouble or people falling off their chairs at what you said in a meeting, or that helped alone to change the culture and open folks' minds to, let's look at the same old problem from a different angle, in a different way.
People were bitching, and I said, no, we need to hear it, because we need to fix all of that through this process. And I think because people heard it, they saw it, it bubbled up. When our report came out, we said, this is why we're addressing it. Right now, we're about to do 16 optimizations. Those 16 optimizations, we won't get any resistance, because everything was written based on that. And I think that is one of the things, and I think it's buying that, but what Carrie just said is so true. If you're consulting, doesn't give you this kind of stuff using the next generation technology, if they're using as-is processes, you're already in an old model. And me and Lynn have talked about, hey, how do we start building the next generation? Because, and me and Carrie too, we've been close friends. I want everyone to be successful. I don't really care what software. Beyond as a non-software agnostic firm, I'm about client, right? So, all right. I want to say thank you for coming. But before I do that, there's a couple things. One, I want to say thank you to the Hub, because to do this, and give us the freedom to challenge IT in a place that all IT is walking around is you got to give them some there, right? We use this Promethean board. We have them in our offices. This is how we collaborate. We use this. We believe that. We use this our online platforms. So I want to say thank you to that. There are some gifts out there. Did you guys all get little pops? It is our 2-year anniversary, right? So, 2-year birthday. 2-year birthday. I want to also give a little shout out to Gabrielle, who designed all of this. I want to also thank my colleague JTH, and then both Carrie and Lynn. Do you guys want to say something really quick? Just close it out.
I think we've said it all. I know we're at time. Like, this was a really enlightening conversation, and thank you for engaging.
And give all yourselves a hand, because it's part of your conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Wait, I have one more thing.
Oh, one more thing. Hold on.
We are having a ThinkSpace happy hour at Audacity Wine Bar from 5:30 to technically 8:30, but 8 o'clock is last call for wine, so be sure you get there before 8.
And I know you all have events. Come before, after, just hang out.
Where is it again?
Right across the street.
Audacity, right across the street. Thanks, everybody. One other thing, if you enjoyed today, there are 3 more tomorrow, so come by.
Yep.
Yes.
And if you haven't received a cake pop from us, please come get one.
Good job, Jen.
Thank you everyone for coming. Can't do this without you.